I sat at my corner desk, the sunlight spilling across the mahogany surface, warming my arms through the silk of my blouse. The city's skyline shimmered beyond my window, a glittering testament to the life I had quietly built, one they thought I would never have. My phone buzzed sharply against the polished wood, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Another message from my brother, probably bragging about some new renovation on the house they'd spent nearly $500,000 on. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, savoring the irony. They had poured $400,000 into his comfort while turning me away when I needed $5,000 for surgery. I still remembered the fear that had gripped me back then. The hospital bills stacking up, my parents' dismissive nods, the way my voice had cracked when I asked for help. I had left that house carrying nothing but my humiliation and a determination they had laughed off. Now, years later, I had a choice: let the memory sting, or let it fuel me. My office smelled faintly of espresso and polished leather. A gentle breeze made the curtains ripple like whispers of the past. My reflection in the window, a woman poised, composed, and prosperous, smiled back. I tapped the message. My thumb lingered a second longer than necessary, and I whispered to myself, half in amusement, half in satisfaction, "They have no idea what's coming." I remember that kitchen like it was yesterday, the floral wallpaper peeling slightly at the corners, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I was barely 22, my hands shaking as I clutched the folder of medical bills. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it over the clatter of dishes. "Mom, Dad, I need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The surgery, it's urgent. I don't have the money." Mom barely looked up from her magazine, and Dad let out that slow sigh I'd come to dread, the one that meant my problems were an inconvenience. $5,000? That's a lot of money, he said, as if the number alone absolved him of responsibility. My throat tightened, and I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes. I swallowed hard, my lips trembling, but the lump wouldn't go away. I just needed to save my life," I whispered. And then the words I would never forget: "We're helping your brother with his house instead. You'll manage." Manage. The word hit me like a slap. Their faces, calm and indifferent, contrasted sharply with a searing panic in my chest. I wanted to scream, to throw the folder at them, to make them see the desperation I carried inside, but something in me shifted instead. I saw my grandmother's note tucked in my diary, the one she had given me years ago. "One day, make your pain pay rent." I clenched my fists around it and felt a strange warmth spread through my fingers. It wasn't just advice, it was a challenge, a promise to myself. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I packed a small bag. I didn't know exactly how I would survive, but I knew I couldn't stay in a house that had never truly seen me. Every step away from that front door felt like heartbreak, but also like a seed being planted, one that would grow into a life entirely of my own making. I left with nothing but determination, the notebook clutched to my chest, and a quiet vow: I would never again depend on anyone who could turn their back on me. The first months were brutal. I slept in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, the hum of washers and dryers a constant reminder that life had a rhythm of its own, one I had to learn to keep up with. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at a cafe serving lattes, evenings at a small bookkeeping firm, and nights spent hunched over a laptop, teaching myself everything I could about real estate investing. My fingers ached, my eyes burned, but every payment I made toward rent and bills felt like a tiny victory. It wasn't long before I met Mara, a seasoned real estate agent in her 50s who ran a boutique property management company. She noticed me late one evening in the library, scribbling notes furiously, and asked if I was serious about a career in real estate. I nodded, my hands trembling with a mix of fear and hope. Mara smiled, a warm, knowing smile that made me feel seen for the first time in years. "You've got fire," she said simply. "Don't waste it waiting for permission." She became my mentor, pushing me to think bigger, teaching me to spot properties that others overlooked, and, most importantly, showing me how to value my own potential. The early wins were small but intoxicating. My first rental property, a tiny duplex in the outskirts of the city, turned a modest profit. Then came a bigger deal, a small commercial building with tenants who needed management but were willing to pay for stability. Each success was like a brick in the wall I was quietly building between my past and my future. I kept my accomplishments hidden from my family. Social media was a lie. Photos of modest brunches, vague updates about work projects, nothing that hinted at the empire slowly taking shape. There were nights when exhaustion and doubt crept in. I remembered the coldness of my parents' rejection and the ease with which they had funded my brother's dreams. I felt moments of bitterness, wondering if I would ever escape the shadow of their favoritism. But then I'd glance at the little notebook from my grandmother, now worn and frayed at the edges, and I'd whisper to myself, "Pain pays rent." The words had transformed into a mantra, a fuel that kept me going when the world seemed determined to keep me small. By the time I turned 27, I was managing multiple properties, employing a small but efficient team, and building a reputation for fairness and professionalism. I had achieved more than I had dared dream during those nights of struggle. And yet, no one in my family knew. They assumed I was still scraping by, struggling to make ends meet. Their ignorance was my secret weapon, a shield I wore like armor as I prepared for the day when the scales would finally tip. I had learned more than business. I had learned patience, resilience, and the quiet power of self-reliance. Every setback, every long night, every lonely moment of doubt had been a stitch in the fabric of the woman I was becoming. And I knew, deep down, that one day the woman I had fought so hard to become would stand before them, not small, not apologetic, but undeniably, breathtakingly in control. It started with a casual text from my brother. "Mom and Dad are in a bit of a bind. Can you help?" My fingers hovered over the screen, a slow smile curling on my lips. I hadn't seen him in years, not since they all assumed I was still struggling, still the fragile daughter they could ignore. When they arrived at my office, they expected a modest apartment, a young woman clinging to survival. Instead, the elevator doors opened to a lobby of polished marble, soft golden light spilling over abstract art and sleek, modern furniture. They froze at the sight of my assistant, a confident young woman in a tailored suit, gesturing for them to follow me. I stood at the end of the hall, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city's skyline behind me. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor, deliberate and slow. My silk blouse caught the light, my gold bracelet gleaming like a silent declaration. I had arrived. They took in the surroundings, the expensive paintings, the awards on the shelves, the sleek conference table where I had negotiated my largest deal. I let the silence stretch, watching the disbelief grow in their eyes. "Welcome," I said, my voice calm, soft, almost warm. I wasn't expecting company today. I gestured for them to sit. My parents, stiff and uncomfortable, glanced at each other. My brother's jaw had tightened. He looked like a man realizing too late that the rules had changed. I walked past them, deliberately slow, and gestured toward the framed documents on the wall. "All of this, every property, every investment, you've assumed I was struggling while you spent lavishly on my brother's house." My words were measured, not angry, just undeniable. My mother's lips parted, eyes wide. We didn't know." I smiled, a small, controlled curve of lips. "Of course you didn't. You weren't meant to. You see, I've been managing multiple properties for years now. That house you spent $400,000 on? It's part of my portfolio. The land it sits on? I own it." Their disbelief was palpable. My father's face went pale. My brother shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of the irony. I let them take it in, the control, the power, the undeniable truth that I had quietly become everything they had doubted I could be. "I'm your landlord," I said finally, letting the words settle like a stone dropped into still water. Their shock echoed in the spacious room, unbroken by excuses or denials. I watched as shame, guilt, and awe warred for dominance in their expressions. For a moment, they didn't speak. The sound of the city below was muted compared to the weight of their realization. I didn't need to say more. The power shift was complete. Years of being ignored, dismissed, and underestimated had culminated in this single, undeniable truth. The daughter they thought they could ignore now held their security in her hands. I leaned back against my desk, letting my hands rest lightly on the polished wood, and watched them squirm under the quiet authority I radiated. There would be no begging from me, no desperate explanations. I had arrived, and this time, I controlled the narrative. I let the silence linger a moment longer, watching their faces slowly register the reality. The girl they had refused was now the woman holding the keys to their comfort. My parents' eyes darted between me and my brother, guilt and shock etched into every line of their expressions. My brother opened his mouth, probably to stammer some excuse, but I raised a hand. "Before any of you say a word, let me be clear," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I will help, but under my terms. No more favoritism, no more assumptions, no more dismissing me when I ask for respect." My father swallowed hard. "Terms? What do you mean?" I gestured toward my office's floor-to-ceiling windows, the cityscape sparkling like a reminder of what I had built. "Your financial troubles, the house, your debts, they are all manageable. But only if you commit to a few things." I outlined the conditions with precision. My brother must take responsibility for his finances, repay any outstanding debts, and commit to contributing to the upkeep of his house. No more relying on others to bail him out. My parents must acknowledge the past, admit that they made mistakes, and respect the boundaries I've established. I would help them financially only if they agreed to stop enabling favoritism. Each of them must pursue personal growth, hobbies, work, or education, something that doesn't depend on me but reflects their independence. I watched them squirm, but I didn't feel satisfaction in their discomfort. I felt relief. For years, I had carried the weight of resentment and helplessness. Now I was handing it over, not in vengeance, but in accountability. "Understand this," I continued, softening my tone slightly. "I care about you. I love you. But love does not mean ignoring the past or letting old habits dictate the future. If you accept these conditions, I will help. If not, well, the choice is yours." My brother's jaw tightened, then slowly relaxed. My mother's eyes glistened as she whispered, We understand. We'll do whatever it takes." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of pride and compassion. I wasn't being cruel. I was teaching them something they had never learned before, that respect and responsibility mattered, that love without accountability was empty. For the first time in years, I felt the scales truly balance. The power that had been denied to me as a young woman, the helplessness I had endured, was now transformed into authority and wisdom. I wasn't just their landlord. I was a guide, a mirror, and a boundary keeper. And yet, in that moment, I realized something profound. Empowerment wasn't just about money or property. It was about clarity, courage, and the courage to demand respect while still holding space for those you love. I had become the woman I was always meant to be, and finally, they were ready, or at least willing, to meet me there. Weeks passed, and change came slowly, but it came. My brother started taking initiative, learning to manage his finances, and even surprising me by handling tenants' issues without calling for help. My parents began to show genuine respect for my decisions, checking in less for control and more for guidance. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and for the first time, I felt the sweet relief of boundaries being honored. I often found myself sitting on my balcony in the evenings, the city lights flickering below like a sea of possibilities. I would pull out the old, frayed notebook from my grandmother, flipping through the pages until I reached her note. "One day, make your pain pay rent." The words had carried me from a trembling 22-year-old asking for help to a woman in full command of her life. I smiled softly, letting the memory of her wisdom wash over me like a warm embrace. It wasn't just about the money or the properties. It was about the transformation, my own and theirs. I had taken the hurt, the dismissals, and the favoritism and turned them into lessons, a blueprint for self-respect and empowerment. I realized that life had a way of balancing itself, but only if you were willing to fight for your worth. Sometimes, I caught my parents glancing at me in a new light. not with the superiority they once carried, but with admiration and tentative respect. And my brother, once careless and entitled, now asked for advice rather than expecting rescue. The dynamics had shifted, but the love that had been buried under years of neglect and misunderstanding was slowly resurfacing, tempered by accountability and care. As I closed the notebook and set it aside, I took a deep breath, savoring the quiet power of this moment. I had survived rejection, illness, and years of underestimation. I had built a life of independence and strength, and I had done it on my own terms. I leaned back, looking at the skyline one last time, letting the city's pulse sync with my own. My journey had been painful, yes, but it had led me to a place of grace, dignity, and authority. And in the end, I whispered to the night, a statement that carried every triumph, every lesson, and every ounce of my resilience. They once refused to save my life. Now they live on my terms.